Hello and welcome to the Indiana Rock Machine. I am your host, Sly Rose, and we really appreciate you coming out tonight. Hold on, because in just a minute or so, we're going to be talking to Chris Pyle. Hello, Chris, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Hello, it's a pleasure to be here.
So nice to see you. I've been a big fan of Chris's for a long time. Not only his work behind the skins, but also his work on canvas too. So thanks for coming, Chris.
Well, thanks.
Tell us where you were born, where you grew up, your Indiana connection.
Okay, I was born in Richmond, Indiana, 1956, and I grew up right outside there in a little rural community around Webster, Indiana, about 5 miles outside of town.
And did you escape? Do you live in Indianapolis now? Is that correct?
Yes, I moved to Indianapolis right after I graduated from high school.
So what high school did you go to?
I went to a high school called Northeastern Wayne High School in Fountain City.
Very good. Now, so that's kind of like where you started, kind of where you did. Did you play? You must have played in high school. What's your first music memory? What's the first thing you remember about music, whether you played it or just remember seeing it for the first time?
I remember it sort of all happened at around the same time. I remember when I was in the 5th grade. It was a little tiny school that I went to. I think there were four classrooms in Webster Elementary, and they would have a parent-teacher night back in those days where they would have music merchants come in, and so as part of the parent-teacher night, you could go look at instruments and maybe pick one out. You know, like, hey, I want to play the trombone, or I want to play the trumpet, and I saw a green sparkle snare drum, Slingerland snare drum, and just fell in love with it. I wanted that drum, and my parents got it for me, and I started playing in the 5th grade band. That was my first like formal part of it, that outside of rock and roll. The first rock and roll experience I ever had was around the same age. My family used to go camping all the time at Whitewater State Park in Liberty, Indiana. And this was the 60s. And let's see, I was, like I said, about 10. So it would have been 64, 65, 66. And they used to have battles of the bands in the pavilions at this campground. And I remember seeing a band. These were all like kind of garage bands, but this one band, I don't know whether they were from Connorsville or where they were from, but they showed up with all red outfits, all red instruments, and red custom tuck and roll amps and PA gear. And so this band was all red, and it was the most magnificent thing I'd ever seen in my life. I couldn't believe it. And I just went, I got to figure out a way to do this somehow.
And at that moment, you realized that you were not colorblind.
That's right. I wasn't. And another thing about it was right out of That Thing You Do. One of the drummers that was playing, he wore sunglasses and played the drums with a cigarette dangling from his lips. And I just thought, man, that guy's the coolest, that's the coolest thing I've ever seen too. So I was sort of smitten at that point. I just thought, I got to be part of this.
So did you play drums then in high school then, or before, or did you have lessons?
I did not. I was basically self-taught pretty much at everything. But I remember where it took off for me was I was not a good student, and kind of a drift, let's put it that way. And I remember I was in the band, but I didn't care anything about it. I was tired of playing the snare drum, and it was boring. And I would cut up in class. And I remember the band director, who I liked very much, he pulled me to the side. I was about 12 or 13 at this point. He pulled me to the side and he said, "Look, I'm going to have to throw you. I'm going to give you one more chance, but I'm going to throw you out of class because you don't care anything about it and you're disrupting the class." And so I listened to him, and oddly enough, simultaneously, right when this was happening, they were getting ready to have what they called their variety show. And part of the variety show that year, there was going to be this big featured number that featured 6 drum sets on stage. It was like a drum battle music feature. I didn't have a drum set. And so I begged and I begged and I begged my dad to please let's try to make that happen. And he was really reluctant. And then we went to a music store in Richmond. It was Hood Music, and we were looking at the drums. And my dad said, "Sit down and play." And I said, "Okay." And I sat down and I started playing the drums. And I just started playing a beat. And my dad said, you can actually play." And I said, "Well, yeah, I've been telling you that I really want to do this." And I'm sorry, my battery thing is not working here. Anyway, so
We can still hear you.
okay, he got me the drum set, and I was in the show, and it just really it just really turned my world around. I had sort of found an identity as a kid, and was good at it, and had not been good at much else previously. And so it was a big moment for me. And then I was in bands from then on, pretty much.
What was the first real band you were in?
You mean as far as like actually
Where you guys got together and played or practiced? The garage? Did you or
well,
actually?
that was a band in Richmond, and they were all really good guys. That band was called Fantan, and but we played all of this like really. We played music nobody wanted to hear. We played like Yes and Captain Beyond and all of this sort of progressive rock, and we had a lot of fun doing it. But there was no place for that band to play, and we were just high school kids, and you know how that goes. We ended up, breaking up, and right after
differences.
Well, just being young,
Yeah.
idiots, and I remember. That was when I was a senior in high school, and that after I left that group and that band broke up, my father said that he and my mother were moving to Indianapolis for a work-related opportunity that he had, and he said, you can stay in Richmond if you want to, but we're moving, and you're welcome to come with us if you want to move to Indianapolis. And I said, well, I don't think that there are very many musical opportunities here, so I'll go with you, to a bigger city. So that's what I did.
So what was your first band with a paying gig that you actually got paid something to perform? Do you remember? Where was the show or any of the stuff behind that, the first gig?
I missed you there.
Do you have any memories of your band, your first gig with a band?
Well, this is the story that we talked about earlier, and I think that everyone needs to hear this because it's so much fun. But when I was in the 8th grade, I was playing the drums and pretty good, and I was, when you go to a school like that, you have agriculture class. I had to take a semester of that, and in this ag class, there was this kid who he wasn't a student at school, but he would just show up at this ag class. I don't know what the arrangement was, but his name was Don, and we took a liking to each other. We were friends in class, and he was older. I think he had failed a few years, and he was also a juvenile delinquent, and was kicked in and out of school, and in the course of a conversation one day, he said, um, "We should get together and play some music." He goes, I play guitar," and I said, "Man, that'd be great. That'd be great." And he, right off the bat, he goes, "I know where we can play." And I said, "Really?" And he goes, "Yeah, we'll get paid to do it too." And I said, "Well, where is it?" And he said, "Well, this friend of mine is opening up a business in Richmond, and he's going to have an opening night, and we can play there for that." And I said, "Well, where is it?" And he said it was down by where the grain elevators were downtown, which was back then was a neighborhood you did not go to. You didn't go there. And so anyway, I talked my dad into letting me do it, and my dad was this, like, how do you put it, Depression era, uh, go do it, just
Mhm.
live your life, do enjoy the opportunities, whatever, however crazy or risky it was, because that's the way he lived his life. He hopped trains and joined the three C's and all that kind of stuff. And so he was all for me playing this gig. So um, I got him to drop me off there, and Dave showed up, and I'm sorry, Don, and you got to imagine here. Don is probably 16. He's already got love and hate homemade tattoos on his knuckles
Right.
from being in reform school, and so we go into this place, and it's a Skid Row joint. I mean, it is like, I was a little bit afraid. And so we get in there, and this guy that who was opening this so-called business, um, for a visual reference, he he looked like he looked like Mr. Costanza with black hair, and so he goes, "Do you guys have a name for your band?" And we said, "No, no. Well, this is the first time we've ever done anything like this." And he said, "I know what we call I know what we'll call your band. We'll call it Hot Fire." And he took out literally took out a crayon, and made, made a made a sign on a piece of cardboard and stuck it in the window. And so we started to play, and Don said, "Do you know Wipeout?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he knew Wipeout. So we played Wipeout and ended, and everything's great. And then, okay, what are we going to do next? And he said, "I know half of Pipeline."
The
So
beginning or the end?
he knew the little guitar thing, to do 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 do. He knew how to do that, but that's all he knew how to do. And so we alternated between the first 8 bars in Pipeline and Wipeout. And so we're playing, and I'm, like I said, it's Skid Row. It's Skid Row, where we are in Richmond, and there was nothing in this store. All there was cigarettes, candy bars, pop, and I think he had one of those Stewart sandwich deals
Oh,
where you
yes. Oh, I remember those. Yeah.
heat up the pizza and the sandwiches, and it was nothing but a cavalcade of bums walking in and out of this place just all night long, just trench coated, just vagrants, and uh, just the Skid Row bums. And like I said, we're playing, alternating, playing a song and a half. So we get around to, I think it's Wipeout for the 10th or 11th time, and I'm sitting there playing, and all of a sudden I notice Mr. Costanza's wife jump up on the counter next to me. So I'm sitting there playing the drums. Her feet are like right at my ears, and she's at the counter right next to me. and the clothes start coming off. And she was tasteful enough to just strip down to her panties and her underwear, and she's going right next to me. I'm 13. And so I'm like, I don't really, it's like David Lynch movie time. And then right as soon as that happened, my parents pulled up in their Buick Electra right outside the window, and they are looking in at this taking place. And I remember looking out and seeing my parents, and my dad had this huge grin on his face. And my mother was the opposite. Her jaw was down on the floor of the car. And so my dad came in and he wisely said, I think you might want to think about wrapping it up. And we did, and it did get raided. It did get raided. Right. As soon as I got out of there quick. And
Fantastic.
yeah, no, it was, that's my very first professional gig.
What about the second band? What year what was the name of your second band? And what would be like the era of that second
Well, when I moved to Indianapolis, I started, uh, my parents lived in Greenwood, and I was 17, and I graduated a little early, and not because of being smart, mind you, just because of that's how my age fell. But I remember my father told me, here again, a Depression era guy, he just said, when you hit 18, you're gone, my man. You're out of here. I don't care what you do, join the army, whatever, but you're gone. You can't live here anymore. And so I went out and looked for work, and I actually got an audition right away with a band. There was a band in Indianapolis, old school Indianapolis people will know this band, but they were called
And Chris was just about ready to tell us the name of that band, and I believe that Chris's phone died right there at that moment. So, um, we're going to wait for Chris to maybe come back in a minute or two. Um, I do have some material that I can share in case he doesn't come back, or we could just do a volume 2 of this a little bit later. We'll just set up another live broadcast, but we'll see if he comes back. We'll still be here, but I can give you a little bit of history about how I know Chris Pyle, CJ Pyle, for you artist folks that are here to learn about his artwork. I met Chris in the mid 80s, early 80s, mid 80s, when he was in a band called The Late Show. And that Late Show kind of morphed into the band Recordio. And so I was a fan of theirs when they were The Late Show. And as they moved through and changed their name, and we're going to get into that when Chris gets back. But that's how I met him. And so I've known Chris for quite a long time. And he also is drumming now with Gordon Bonham, who will be a guest on this show sometime down the road. Gordon's a good friend of mine. And in fact, I met Gordon at a Recordio show back then. Recordio had a habit of letting drunks like myself come up and sing with the band on occasion. So I'm sure Gordon wasn't drunk at the time, but Gordon was playing with another band, and we'll get into the story when Gordon's with us. But he was with another band, and Don Main, the lead singer of Recordio at that time, he asked Gordon to come up and play guitar, and then asked me to come up and sing a song, the next song. So looks like Chris is back. I see you, Chris. I just need to add you to the stream.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, that's all right. I was just telling people how you and I met, the Recordio, the Late Show, end of Late Show, early Recordio, and how Gordon Bonham is a friend of ours. And the story that I told you about meeting Gordon was actually on stage with you guys. So we'll I think I'll let Gordon tell that story because he may have better memories of it than me because I had been overserved at that point. But you were just about ready to talk about going into your second band,
Yes.
and you had moved to Indy.
Yeah. Like I said, did you hear the part where I said my dad said you got to get out of here at
Yes.
18? Okay.
Yep. So
Okay.
last thing we knew, you were hitting the road.
Yes. Well, like I said, I had put out some feelers in Indianapolis and got an audition with a band that, as I said, some older people in town will remember them. They were called Pleasant Street, and it was they were a good group. They were I would call them like a lounge act, but they were really good. They were really professional and funny. They were good comedians, good singers. Um, and they were putting together this large scale concept group. It was really bizarre. It was called the Buffalo Brothers Wild West Show. And these guys, they were managed by Ron Perry, who managed the Wright brothers. And they had four singers in front of the band, drums, bass, and a keyboardist, organ player, and then I think three horn players. So it was this big group, and they did all kinds of like sort of countrified. They did some Neil Diamond and stuff with this big horn section, and we had a residency actually at a huge hotel out by the airport. It was actually the airport that the airplane flew into years ago.
Mhm.
And I think it was like about I don't know, it was a big room. I think you could get about 400 or 500 people in there. And we played there 6 nights a week and lived in the hotel. It was wonderful. The management of the place loved us. They let us do anything we want. I had my own keys to and we had room service. I had keys to the pool and the spa, and it was really great. That lasted about a year. And then the corporate people stepped in and they wanted the band out of there. And that band, this is another great twist. That band, the leaders of the group, hooked up with this really shaky woman who wanted to manage the band, and they started working with her. And she said, "Don't worry, I've got you guys a gig." Um, Olivia Newton-John has lost her backup band, and we're going to plug you in with her. And so that she said, you need to go to this certain venue in Wilmington, Delaware. And so we all drove out to Wilmington, Delaware, fairly excited that we were going to be backing up Olivia Newton-John.
I
And we
would be
get
too.
to the gig, and it's a circus. It's a poor Jack circus. It's like there's no Olivia Newton-John. There's none of that. We were stuck in Wilmington, Delaware, playing in a tent, and let's see. Let me think of the acts here. I had to back up. We had to back up the acts. I had to back up all of them as a circus drummer. And let's see. There was Tony the Wonder Horse, Gentle Ben the Bear. There was an Italian wire act. Those guys were meaner than snakes. Those guys, I mean, I had to sit there and do drum rolls and stuff when they're doing their high wire act and catch them doing their flips and doing all of their tricks. And if you missed a cue, those guys would get right up in your, they grab a hold of you, So it was, I remember, and we were stuck there. We had no way out. We had no other gig. We had to do the duration of this circus in order to get paid to get home. And so I remember me and a couple of the guys would kill time and jam in the tent during the day. And I remember jamming away one afternoon. And I mean, we were getting into it and our heads were down and, we're like way into the music, and I look up and right in front of me is the bearded lady. just staring at me,
That was
you
Olivia
know?
Newton-John. Was
Yeah,
that Olivia?
exactly. No, and so anyway, that was, and then that band was too big, and so it could not sustain itself. So then I got plugged into, because of their management, I got plugged into a folk band, another really good band called Whole Wheat, and that's when we talked about this earlier. That's when the patio became a music venue, was when I was with that band. That we played there a lot, and before we played there, they had no music in there.
They converted it at that point. What was it
They
before they converted it?
it was always the patio, but this guy, I think oddly enough, I think his name was Gordon. This guy Gordon owned it, and it was a bit of a rough neighborhood bar at that point. And like I said, they had a pool room in the back, and there was a lot of gambling going on. And Chubby Wadsworth, I think that Gordon wanted to get out of it, and he sold the place to Chubby. And Chubby was a music person, and so he started having music in there, and we were one of the first actual bands, I think, to play in there, with Chubby as the owner.
So that band, is that the same band that you did your first recording with? Was that the Bloomington recording studio?
Yes, it sure was. It sure was at Jack Guilfoy's studio in Bloomington. My first recording, I think I was 19 when we did that. We did some recording down there with that band.
So that must have seemed quite an experience, right? To walk into that room and go, someone, I've got to play really, really well right now.
Yeah, and it was. I thought I played really well, but I didn't play really well. I listen back to that stuff and go, boy, you thought you were playing really well, but it took some years and some seasoning to really get. Recording is an art unto itself, and you're really under a microscope. Everything that you do, you hear everything that you do. You can't hide, and I was still pretty wet behind the ears at that point,
Mhm.
as far as recording goes.
So after you left, or after Whole Wheat, then is the Slink Rand? Is
It
that?
is, it is, which was a totally different experience, uh, in so many ways. Uh, Whole Wheat ended. I was living in Indianapolis with the sound man and his wife, and I was out of work, and it wasn't looking real good for me right at that point. It was a kind of a low point. I was basically just kind of flopping in their house. They were kind enough to let me stay there until I got on my feet, and and I remember I got a phone call from a friend of mine. Uh, Unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Gary Brewer, fantastic drummer, local Indianapolis drummer, just really great. Gary and I were good friends, and Gary was working at a pro shop that all the drummers used to go to in Lawrence called Fred's Drums, and that was where everybody went, And Gary was working there with Fred, kind of. He called me up and he said, "I just got this call from this guy in Champaign, Illinois, this manager Ken Holden, and they're auditioning drummers for this group over there." And he said, "It's a hard rock group." And he said, "I just moved," which was accurate. Gary had just moved back from Champaign. He had been in the All Star Frogs with Duke Tomato.
Mhm.
And he was in that one of the earlier versions of that band. And Gary had just moved back to town, and he did not want to move back to Champaign again. Plus, it was a kind of a heavy hitting gig. I mean, physically, I don't think Gary wanted to do it. And so he gave me the number, and I called up the manager, and the manager said, "Bring your drums, be at this address at this time on Saturday, this date." So I loaded up my drums, drove over to Champaign, and got, and there were 50 guys there, to audition. And so I waited and I waited and I waited. And it came my turn, and I set my drums up, and we played 3 or 4 songs. And I had a really, really good time playing with those guys. I loved them. Slink was just a magnificent guitar player out of the Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck mold, just a rock star in every sense of the word. Fabulous. And the band was really good. It was a 3-piece band with a singer. It was a Led Zeppelin kind of format, like bass, drums, guitar, and lead singer. And so I got done and we exchanged words, and it was all very pleasant. And Kenny told me, he said, we've got tons of more people that we're going to audition. We just have Ozzy, the singer, told me they ended over 100 drummers. And I just said, thanks, guys. And I went back to Indianapolis and wallowed in my misery, and then gave it a couple of weeks. And then I decided, well, I'll call Kenny, the manager, and I'll say, hey, thanks for the shot. Thanks for letting me audition. I appreciate it. Good luck, And so I called him and I said, Kenny, this is Chris Pyle, blah, blah, blah. And he said, I said, I'm assuming you found somebody, good luck. Thanks for letting me audition. And he goes, you're it. He goes, you're it. You got to, we need you here like within the next couple of days.
Did you forget to give him your phone number or something? I was like, all of a sudden it was just perfect timing.
Pardon me?
Did you forget to leave them your phone number, and they just have been saying, well, okay,
no,
we're going to wait.
What I had assumed was continued to audition people. And I figured I'd give it 2 weeks and then give them basically a courtesy call, like,
Gotcha.
like, thank you for the audition. You obviously have chosen someone else, but thanks. It was fun. I enjoyed it. And I called him and he said, no, as a matter of fact, I was going to call you because you got the job. And so I played with them for 2 years. Really, really great band, very popular, huge band in the area. Champaign, Illinois was hopping back then in the mid 70s. I was in the band 77 and 78. And it was, it's Champaign, it's college town. There's lots of people from Chicago down there. And it was just a big rock and roll city. And of course, Blytham Music Agency was there, which was Irving Azoff's agency. He had started that. When I moved to Champaign, Irving Azoff had just moved to California with REO Speedwagon.
Right.
And so he had left the agency in good hands, and we were booked out of that agency. And the 2 years that I was with Slink ran, we played 1 year, we played 325 days. And the next year we played 330 days in 1 year.
Wow.
And that was, but I couldn't take it. There were drugs in the band. Actually, the reason they were auditioning drummers in the first place was because there had been a drug problem, and they needed to replace that person, and so it wasn't like super decadent or anything like that, but there were drugs in the band, and like I said, that was a very animated, physical, hard rock.
So you guys were, as you said, pretty popular at that point. So how far were you traveling from Champaign? Like, where were you going to shows?
The rock and roll circuit that band did was based in Champaign. We played Chicago all the time. We played at a place called Mother's. There's a place there called the Rush Up. There were tons of Chicago clubs, Huey's. The list goes on and on and on. Not to mention the outer suburb clubs like the Night Gallery in Waukegan and blah blah. And Cheap Trick was still around. They were sort of exiting the clubs at this point, but they were still playing clubs. Slink was friends with Rick Nielsen. They were both vintage guitar people, and so they were friendly with each other. And uh, basically was Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, Joliet, Champaign, Carbondale, St. Louis.
So you guys played a bunch of places and a bunch of different clubs and that sort of stuff. What was your most memorable moment with that band? Anything stick out? Like, did the stage collapse? Did the bar close? Did the, police show up? What's your most memorable time with that band?
Well, there's lots of them. There's lots of them. And, I want people to know that, I'm not I wasn't a real, I was always a casual person when it came to drugs and things like that. But one of the memories that does stick out and was we played a couple of biker rallies, and we used to play at this place called Straight Shooters was the name, and they had bike rallies there, and I remember they loved Slink, and I remember them forcing us to do drugs before we played. They would not let us get on stage without doing this was methamphetamine they all wanted us to take. And it was like I was begging them, just like I don't want to do this. And it's like, no, you're doing it. You're doing it. So that's one memory. And then there's
Did the songs get sped up a little bit for that show?
No, actually, it didn't
No, how
affect the
about that?
it didn't affect the music that much at all. It was just it was just really it's nasty stuff to begin
Mhm.
with, and to be sort of forced to do it in an odd kind of way was really strange. That was a kind of a weird experience. We attracted that element in that band. Um,
What was your final year with that band? About what year did you
78,
78 and
70.
what happened?
I was
What
getting
caused you to leave?
I was getting sick. I was
Ah,
getting sick. I was getting sick from the schedule, and it was relentless, and we were traveling a lot, and I couldn't keep any weight on. It was like I lost probably a pound a night playing in that band, and I just didn't feel good, and I remember getting a kidney infection, and I had walking pneumonia twice, and the band showed no signs of letting up, and we had had some missteps with a few record labels. Slink actually got offered an audition with Aerosmith when Joe Perry left, but he wanted to have his own band. He wanted to keep his
mm,
own band.
mhm.
But I couldn't do it anymore. I just was physically ill, and I was only 21, 22 years old. To be that sick when you're that, and I just said I got to get out. I got to get out of this, and so I moved back to Indianapolis.
So you left that band, and then you moved into another big band. Now you've gone from a really big band in Champaign to the Late Show.
Yes.
So were you there at the very beginning of the
No.
Late Show? So
No.
you
No.
kind of came in a little bit later because those guys were high school chums, right?
Yes. Yes. They had gone. There were different names. There was Claiborne, and then they had a band called World. Um, and I remember I had moved back to Indianapolis, 79, and I was living with a friend of mine, and we had this great place. Oh man, it was so much. His uncle had this little mansion basically down around Fall Creek, down by the fairgrounds, and he said, "You, as long as you stay here, you can stay here for free. I just want somebody to live here." So we had this beautiful home, and so I started like dipping my toe in the water uh, around the music scene. That's when I first met Tooch. I went to the patio, and Tooch was mixing a band up there, and I just couldn't believe how good it sounded. That was my first introduction to Mike Petrucci, and then I was just kind of filling in for different bands around town, and I was working with this guy named Steve Lester, who was from the Boys Next Door, and he was in The Late Show. He was in that current version of the band, and Steve did a lot of production work in the studio, and I started working with him as a studio musician, and he called me up one day and he said the drummer from the band, who was Mark Cutzinger, he said the drummer has left the band, and we've got gigs, we've got a full schedule, and would you consider joining the band? And so I joined the band in 1979, and then Steve was around for maybe a year after I joined, and then due to musical differences, Steve left the band.
Is Steve in this
And
picture? Is this Steve on
that's
the far left?
that's Steve on the far left. Yeah. Steve Lester, great musician, really great musician, good guy. Steve was a little bit older than us, and he'd already had his share of fame. He was, like I said, he was in the Boys Next Door. They were a hugely popular band, and he was a good songwriter. And but his songwriting, kind of a California sound, like a Jackson Brown, Eagles kind of a vibe to his songwriting.
Looks like Michael Martin Murphy to me.
Yeah,
I expect him to sing Wildfire at any second.
well, it was kind of he was
Same
coming
thing.
from that place a little bit,
Mhm.
and so I became really close friends with Mark right away, and Don too. But Don lived with his girl. Mark was a bachelor. Don lived with his girlfriend, and so I didn't see Don I didn't hang out with Don as much as I did Mark. Mark and I hung out together all the time, and we loved the same kind of music. We were Beatle freaks,
Mhm.
and the Who, and the Yardbirds, and the Kinks, and the Move. All those bands, we loved all those bands, and we started introducing that material into the group, along with like I said, Don Main and Steve Lester and Mark. They all wrote music,
Mhm.
and so there was plenty of original material. But we would do these Beatles songs and Who songs and Kink songs, and Steve just hated it. He didn't like it, and because he said, "I've already done all this. I don't want to play these songs anymore. I did them when I was 16. I don't want to do it." And so that created problems. And so Steve left the band, mutual parting of the ways, and we kept hearing about. Everybody kept, we'd hear in conversations, people would say, "You ought to check out this guy, Rick Clayton. You got to check this guy out. He's perfect for you guys. He's perfect." And we checked Rick out and went, "Yeah, he's perfect. He's perfect." And so we got Rick in the band, and man, that was it. That band took off, like literally I would say within a month's time, that band was on fire. It was just on fire.
Well, I can say that's probably the reason why I loved coming to your show so much, is because all the music you just or just mentioned is right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah.
So at that point, it didn't take long for me to become a big fan, and you guys played them so well. And it's like it's still what's great now is back when you guys a few years ago, when you were still doing some live shows, just as good now as you were then, and probably one of the best cover bands I'd ever heard in my life. I mean, up until now, and I'm 29. So,
Well,
but anyway, it's some great work.
well, we loved it. We loved that music. We all grew up with it. I am one of those people, one of those kids that was sitting in front of the television set the first time the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan. I remember it. It was burned into my psyche like with a branding iron.
Mhm.
I remember every second of it, and we all grew up that way, especially and and we not just, like I said, not just the Beatles, but the Animals, all of those groups. We just loved all those groups, and loved playing the music, and because we loved it so much, we sort of thought it was an honor to play that music, and as I guess luck or as timing would have it, no one was really doing that. No
Nope.
one was doing that at that time,
You're
and
right.
that was a real underground sort of thing to do. And we didn't plan it that way. We just played the music because we liked it so much, and I think that's the reason why the band was so successful, because we were sincere about it. We weren't just doing an act. We loved it.
So I've got a picture here that I haven't shown you yet. I picked this because this was usually one of my favorite parts of the show, because this usually meant that everybody was dropping their instruments and running around and picking up another instrument of that night. And this picture, whenever I see you in front of a
Yeah.
microphone singing a song, that makes me think that this song might be Gloria.
Yes. That is that I I remember we were playing a gig in northern Indiana one time, and Don said, Don really carried the load of the band vocally. I mean, Rick sang his share. Mark had a couple of features. I think Mark sang "Slow Down," and maybe he did a Buddy Holly song, "Not Fade Away," I think.
Mhm.
But Don, and you play 3 nights, you play 3 sets a night, and sometimes more, and sometimes 4 sets. And so Don would his voice would get tired, and he would mention that every now and then. He'd just go, "Man, you guys need to pick up some more material here, so I need a break," and
Right.
we would do instrumental things. And I told him one time, I said, "I'll sing a song. I'll sing a song. Would that help you?" And he goes, "Yeah, right. You're going to sing a song." I said, "No, man. I'll sing Gloria. I'll sing. I'll sing that song." And I got up and I sang it. And Rick played drums well enough to play with the band, and so that became a sort of, let's face it, it's a novelty thing. It
But
gave
boy, it
Donna.
was a lot of fun because I could see you guys, and sometimes it wasn't always, if I remember correctly, and I don't always remember correctly, but I can remember it wasn't always Rick that went to the drums. It might have been somebody. I think it was kind of like a rotating thing, because we would see two different lineups like 2 nights in a row when you'd come out and do
Well,
this.
we were fortunate enough to have a lot of fans, and we had a lot of friends, a lot of musician friends, and they would show up at our gigs. So, every now and then, or a lot of times, especially at the Vogue and the Patio, I'd see half a dozen drummers that I knew in the
Mhm.
crowd, and I'd go, "You're playing on Gloria, get up," And of course, it was just fun, it's just fun. It was a fun song. People liked it, and I sort of was doing like a my version of Lou Reed, basically, which is someone who's not really singing, sort of singing.
But memory, the rose-colored glasses that I'm wearing now make me think that that was one of the highlights of the night. So
Well, it's funny that you should say that, but so many people say it to me to this day. They just say, "Man, we used to love it when you would get up and do that," and I just it makes me feel really, really great. But it was just kind of a lark.
well, necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's right,
So
that's
what
right.
I'd like to do this because as a big fan of you guys, um, we would like to talk about, we talked about Tooch a little bit earlier, and he was involved in this.
Yes.
You can see I've got the autographs from you guys on here, and a
Wow.
great
It's
picture of you guys in the back.
not easy to find those. You're lucky to have that one.
So this was, and actually this is a really good one. I think I might have picked this up at Ozarka Records in Bloomington. That's for the Bloomington crowd that's watching now. So tell us a little bit about Portable Pop, because it has one it's got its own story. So let us know about that, would you?
Well, it's an interesting story. When Rick came into the band, you know, one of the things that we liked about Rick, besides his, you know, incredible talent and stage presence, was he wrote too. He wrote songs. And so you had Mark writing songs. Mark wrote with Don a lot. Don was always very prolific and still is a really prolific songwriter. And Rick wrote. And so we had this sound together, and we had kind of honed doing gigs, and we were doing a lot of Don's original material. And as I said, Don and Mark started writing together, and Rick started writing. And before we knew it, we had this record. We had the material for it, and we wanted to record it. But we recorded it. Like a lot of people made records back then, we wanted to use it to promote the band. It was a promotional tool. And so we only pressed 1,000 of them. And we booked studio time. I think it was it may be on the back of the record. I think it was Soundsmith Studios. It was over there off of 65th and Binford.
Yeah,
But
Soundsmith.
Is that on there?
Yep.
Okay.
Mhm.
Because the place changed its names. It changed names a few times. But it was a jingle house. You know, they did jingles in there, and everything sort of had that sound to it. It sounded like really just sterile. And we didn't like the way it sounded in there, so we didn't want to record in the main room. So what we did was, since we played live so much, we set up on their loading dock out in the back.
I love this story. I love this story.
And we just set up like a live band. We set up just like we would on stage, with the microphones, monitors in front of the band, drums behind, you know, just like a live performance. And they ran all the cables from the loading dock into the control room. Tooch co-engineered along with Greg Riker.
Yes.
Greg Riker was the I think he's listed as a producer, and he was one of the main engineers on it. And so I think Don
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
think Don traded Greg a 60s era jazz bass to do the record. And
Mhm.
and so we recorded that album, and that's how it was done. And we got Bill Brunt was the art director. I was in, you know, kind of the person that was the go-to artistic eye, I guess. And I remember meeting with Bill Brunt, and he told me what he had in mind and showed it to me. And I said, I just really like it. I just really like where you're going with this packaging. And he took the photo on the back, and that was taken at the Vogue, the photo on stage at the Vogue. And it's a great photograph. And like I said, we pressed 1,000 of them. And let's fast forward here. We're into the 90s. No, we're into either the late 90s or the early 2000s. And we were definitely on a hiatus. I mean, Don was raising his family. I was raising my wife, and I are raising my son. Mark had his personal life. Rick had his personal life. Everybody was kind of apart. And I started getting inquiries from Japan, emails from Japan and from the Netherlands and from all these different places. And this record had just become a cult collector's item. And then we came to find out that Goldmine magazine had given it, you know, all of these top. It's like one of the top rated power pop records of all time. And the record just took on a second life. You know, it just and that led to that led to our most recent recording, um, where on the strength of the Late Show portable pop record and the legacy of that band, Little Steven on Little Steven's Underground, they just gave us the green light, and just when they saw that we had new music coming out, they agreed to play it. So
In fact, I think I listened to Don being interviewed on Sirius XM when that record dropped, whenever that
yes,
was, like 2018, something like that.
yeah, 3 years ago, I think.
Yep.
Yeah,
19.
that was I forget that personality that he interviewed with on the. It was a guy on the West Coast, but yeah, yeah. So interesting story behind the record. It just a lot of record collectors consider it a holy grail item. You know.
Yeah, it's not only the power pop genre, but also I think I've seen it on a lot of charts of unsigned band charts, like records produced by unsigned bands. So
Yes.
local. Like this was, I think, wasn't this on Rave? Was this on Rave Records?
Yeah,
Yes, Rave Records.
which was our own label. We
Hmm.
created that label and started that, and that's what we released it under. And like I said, 1,000 copies. Um, you know, it amazed me how much people talk about it. They're still interested in it.
And what I'd like to do is talk a little bit more. Like I'm showing my Late Show Recordio geekdom here to the
Okay.
crowd, but we're going to get into why the band morphed from Late Show to Recordio to Rock House to back to
Okay.
Late Show, that sort of thing. But this was a late 80s. This was 1986, so mid to
Yep.
late 80s. This
That,
was the a bit of recording that was done in Ardent Studios, right?
yes.
In Memphis?
Yes. Yeah. We played down there a lot. We had a huge following in Memphis. It was almost like a second home for a while, and we worked out of Memphis. Like I said, we would play the universities and in the South, and I don't know how it happened. You'd have to ask Don. But everybody has these different memories of some of these things, but I just remember uh, changed. Um, we had been the Late Show for a really, really long time. We were playing all these different markets. The music was changing a little bit. Don's writing was changing a little bit. It was getting a little bit more contemporary. The sound was hardening a little bit. Um,
Mhm.
there was definitely a stylistic shift, and so due to that, we thought we may want to rename the band. I don't think all of us now looking back on it probably think we should have left it alone, but we renamed the band. It was I had a little 50s reel to reel tape recorder um, in a house I lived in, and that I found there, and it was called a Recordio. And I just thought, man, that's kind of a cool space age name. And
Mhm.
so we uh, switched the name and went under that guise, and then um, we just booked some time down in uh, at Arden. We booked studio time down there, and we got hooked up with a producer engineer by the name of John Hampton, who we absolutely adored. We adored John. He was like one of us. He was like family to us. We loved him. He had a great sense of humor, and he was enormously talented. He'd played drums for. He was a great drummer. He'd played drums for Jimmy Buffett, and was just a talented producer and engineer. And we started working with him and doing these recording projects. And every time we were down south, we we booked time down there and worked with John. And before we knew it, we another basically another album's worth of material with John. And that kind of got put on hold because we were going to get signed by Atlantic Records, and so we held off on releasing it.
And wasn't Chrysalis involved at one point or the other
There
too?
were a couple of labels involved, but Atlantic was the front runner. That's who we wanted to be with. That's who we wanted to be with.
Didn't you guys have a couple close calls? Maybe Chrysalis was in a different close call, or was it always just the one shot where it was Chrysalis and then Atlantic that you talked about?
I don't remember. Those record companies worked in mysterious ways. I mean, they all know each other, or they all knew each other, and it's like once somebody was hot on a band, maybe the other label would cool off and get out of the way. And there was some of that going on with Atlantic. We had the guy that was our A&R person there was a guy by the name of Michael Galelli, and he would just show up at our gigs. He would just, we had a kind of a pseudo manager that worked with us locally, Bill Lowry, and Bill would tell us, he'd go, Galelli's flying in, he wants to see you guys. And he would just show up at our gigs, and he really loved us, and he kept kicking it upstairs. He just kept working with the band, getting more people at the label to listen to it, and it eventually came to a head. So we were managed out of Nashville, Tennessee. Then we picked up a manager by the name of David Cannon, and our attorney was this heavy hitter at the time named Bill Zumwalt. Bill Zumwalt had signed a lot of bands. He'd signed Jason and the Scorchers. He'd signed Keep Your Hands to Yourself.
Georgia Satellites.
He'd signed the Georgia Satellites. He'd signed some other bands. I think he had gotten the Barkays there a gig early in his career. He was an attorney, and so we had good people working with us. And so finally, Galelli got to the point to where he said, the vice president of the company wants to come and see you guys. We're going to set up a showcase in Nashville. And so they set up a showcase for us, and it was a terrible gig. It was terrible for everybody. All the other bands had a hard time too. It was a terrible venue. The sound wasn't very good. It was the horrible atmosphere. Just a bad showcase, and not just us, everybody. And we went out to dinner with the vice president. His name was Peter something. We went out to dinner with him and Galelli and our management team, and we had this great dinner after the gig. And Jim Zumwalt looked at the vice president of Atlantic Records and said, "Do we have a deal?" And he said, "We do. Be in my office on Monday." This was a Friday or Saturday. He said, "Be in my office on Monday. We'll write it up. We'll sign them." And then I got a phone call on Monday afternoon. Of course, we're all on top of the world, I mean, we'd worked for 10 years for this, and
Right.
And really with a lot of blood and sweat involved, and a lot of grueling touring and hours, and so Zumwalt went to get the band signed, and he walked in to the vice president's office, and the vice president just said, "We've decided not to sign them, and we're going to sign we've got these other two bands that we're going to sign instead." So that ended that, and it was really disappointing because we were working with a Scottish producer who we also adored by the name of Ian Ritchie, who had worked with Pink Floyd and Culture Club and all these different British groups, and we just loved him. He was fabulous. He loved the band, and he was really disappointed because he was gonna do the debut record. He was gonna produce it, and it was gonna be great. So it was a soul crushing time. We never got over it. We never ever got over it. That was the end, really. That was the beginning of the end of the group.
What year would that have been? Do you happen to remember?
Yeah, that was probably 89.
Okay.
88, 89, 89. It's more like it because we
Mhm.
soldiered on for a couple more years, and then as Rockhouse, and
Okay.
that was a good band too. That was with Scott Fletcher. After like I said, after the soul crushing series of events, we just emotions were raw and we splintered. It was hard. It was hard to keep the band together.
Yeah, it's tough because I saved this from a long time ago. I can tell you where you're playing like the next week or two, but there's Scott Fletcher there for the people that remember him when he was playing with the band. Also, Chris did not Chris, but Scott did a lot of road work for you folks too, right? He was like the most valuable player on the off the bench.
Yeah, he was. Scott was just a really great guy. We loved him. He was really positive and full of energy and I never really ever saw him do anything but smile and giggle most of the time. He was really a pleasure to be around. Plus, he was enormously talented. He was a gifted singer and musician, could play any instrument you put in front of him, really. And uh, yeah, Scott had been in some groups that were sort of similar to the Late Show around Indianapolis. I think one band was called FM Pop, and another band was called the Shakes, and they
Mhm.
were sort of a Late Show vibey kind of band, and but they were all, excuse me, much younger than us, and so I think that Scott might have been in between bands or something, or wasn't playing, and so we thought, Come work with us. We'd love to have you." And so he was there when Rick um, decided to leave, and that's when Scott started playing with the band, and then the sound got even harder with Rockhouse,
Mhm.
and so that we did that for a couple years. It was
Yeah, we
fun.
used to yeah,
It-
yeah, I've got a couple of friends, my friends, Ann and Sandy, we used to go see them a lot, and when, Scott was, singing or when he was with the band there for a while, they just loved Scott, and what the funny thing is Scott was filling in for Rick, so their favorite song from Portable Pop was "Hey Sue," and "Hey Sue" was a Rick Clayton song, so fortunately for the ladies that I went along with, Scott would start to do
I'm
too.
sorry, I lost you.
I was
I lost.
just telling the story of my friends Ann and Sandy who liked Scott, and Scott was filling in for Rick, and they finally got Scott to sing "Hey Sue" that Rick wrote that was from Portable Pop.
Oh yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
we were still doing some of that material then.
he didn't want
Yeah.
to,
Pardon me?
but he didn't want to, I don't think, but I don't think the rest of the band did. But the two gals I used to go see the band with all the time, they talked them into doing that. So,
Yeah.
what is your most memorable show moment with Recordio Late Show?
Well, I hate to piggyback it with it sounds like I'm name dropping, but
Well, that's why we're here.
when the band was at its peak, we got the opportunity. This is just a remarkable turn of events from our standpoint. We got the opportunity to play with the Pretenders. This was Chrissy Hines' very first gig moving back to England. They had just released the first Pretenders album, and she had not played in the United States. And the gig was at the Agora in Columbus, Ohio, which was probably about a 2,300 seat theater, nice
Hmm.
big theater, and I mean, the hype was on. I mean, it was her United States, and she had a hit album on her hands. She also had two junkies in her band, which was very unfortunate.
Hmm.
But I remember we got to the gig, and we were sort of, kind of waiting around to a sound check or whatever. And the Pretenders had a really gnarly British biker road crew, really just nasty guys. And it was our time to do our sound check, and we said, well, where do you want us to set up? And they gave us this ridiculous, place to set up. We were set up in front, of course, but I remember one of the road crew guys said, you'll be lucky if we give you one microphone, and we went, okay, great. This is going to be one of those kind of gigs. But here's where Tooch comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Tooch sidles up to the Pretenders front of house sound guy and starts, as Tooch was so good at, he starts schmoozing this guy and just talking shop with him. And, Tooch was a really friendly guy and very likable. And he got this, the Pretenders sound man to just go ahead and sign off and give us the full PA.
Yeah.
They mic'd the band up and were nice to us.
Mm-hmm.
He was nice to us. So, the show starts. This place is standing room only. You can't move in there because it's this big gig, and no one in Columbus, Ohio had ever heard of our band. They'd never heard of us. We were just an opening act, and we did our show. We did the Portable Pop album, and we encored with, I think, maybe I Can't Explain, and maybe My Generation. We ended with a couple of covers, not encore. We ended with a couple of covers, and the place completely erupted. I mean, it was like they were erupting throughout the whole show, having never heard any of that music before. They must have just been keyed up for the gig, but people were just screaming, and they were pounding on the stage, and they wanted us to keep playing. And I remember seeing Chrissie Hynde in the wings, and it was like, get them off the stage, they're done. And so, but it was really a triumphant gig. And like I said, so odd because no one had a clue who we were. We were just on the bill.
Yeah. And I can tell you, no one was playing songs by The Who from that vintage back then. That was about the only place you were going to see them or hear them.
Yeah. And you can also imagine that audience, if you like the Pretenders' first record, you might really like the Late Show songs, because it's that British sort of based rock and roll, so they dug it, they really dug it. They were into it. We were on cloud nine after that gig. I mean, it was like, we couldn't believe it. That was a high point.
What I'd like to do now is kind of transition into your alter ego, or maybe that Chris Pyle is your alter ego and CJ Pyle is your current ego. But
Okay.
I'd like to talk about some of the artwork you've done. You were kind enough to send along some pictures that you've done, and they've been in some pretty famous publications. So, when did you first get paid to do any artwork? How old would you have been, or when did that happen?
Well, I had became interested in art when I was really, really young. My mother was thrilled that I had what she considered talent and ability in that area, because she was really artistically minded herself. And so they always encouraged me to draw and paint, which I did as a kid. And then, music kind of took over when I became a teenager. And I went on the road as a musician right out of high school. I didn't go to college or anything because I was, kind of in demand as a drummer, and I could work. So I liked that. And but when The Late Show was playing, I remember, I would say probably in 83, 84, I started to really get interested in art again. I really started to study it in my spare time. I would go to the library and check out book after book after book on, color theory and design and all of the artists that I liked, and studying art history and stuff. And and I just started doing it again. And I had a spare room in a townhouse my wife and I were living in. And I would just, in my spare time, I did a lot of drawing and painting. And I remember a, uh, a musician friend of mine, who was an art director for Nuvo News Weekly.
Mhm.
Um, he said to me, he said, "Why don't you? I'm going to give you an assignment." I'd never done anything like that before. He said, "I'm going to give you an assignment, and I want you to do some drawings for the paper." And I did some pieces for Nuvo, and they were received very well, and everybody liked him. The paper liked him, and so they started having me do the covers of the magazine or the covers of the newspaper, and I did a series of covers. And like I said, people really seemed to like what I was doing, and so at that point, um, the Nuvo thing kind of came to an end, and I had decided that I wanted to maybe pursue some commercial illustration
Mhm.
avenues. And so oddly enough, there was an agent, there, artists have agents just like musicians do. And there was an illustration agent in Indianapolis. Her name was Lisa Freeman. She's a wonderful person, she's got a wonderful family, and she was a great agent. She had a very manageable small roster of artists, and she took me on. And I started working with her, and this is pre-computer.
Mhm.
When I was working as an illustrator in the beginning, you there were it was they called it the four F's, I think. It was fax, phone, and FedEx. So you would fax preliminary drawings to people. They would okay the drawings. You do the finished artwork, stick it in a FedEx package, and ship it to the magazine. I was an editorial illustrator, which is mostly I did mostly newspapers and magazines. That was my forte, and I was okay at it. I wasn't doing very well. I was just sort of struggling getting work, and I had a meeting with her, with my agent, and I said, "I just don't think this is working out, Lisa. It's not happening like I hoped it would." And she said, "I totally understand." She said, "Let's give it one more shot." And so what people used to do back then, what she used to do is she would print up samples of people's work on
Mhm.
postcards. Really nicely done, really expensive print operation. And she would buy mailing lists to clients, and send out these mailers, and the art directors would see the mailers, and they if they liked somebody, they'd tack it to their wall and keep them in mind for another project. Well, I had switched mediums. I had stylistically switched a little bit, and overnight, after that last try of that particular mailer, basically that next year things just exploded. And she would call me up during the day, and she'd go, "I can't believe this, but Rolling Stone just called. They want you for, this record, that piece that you're looking at right there.
Mhm.
That's Jarvis Cocker. I forget the name of the band that he was with. I think it was Pulp. And here's the story behind that piece. This is how great things were back then. Um, for those people that might not know, Rolling Stone that's like a crown jewel as an illustrator to get that gig. And the art director, Fred Woodward, is an icon. He was an iconic art director, superstar. And he had an assistant who was also an iconic art director, Gail Anderson. And so they called me with a gig, and they said, "We want you to do this guy." And I said, like I said, this is pre-internet. This is pre-internet. So you don't have the material, the source material that you did. And I said, they were in the Time Life building, I think, and they had all these photo archives that they used to send to artists for reference material. And I said, do you have any photos on this guy so I can, get a likeness or whatever?
Mhm.
And they said, no, we don't have anything on him, but but we can describe him to you.
Oh,
And I,
geez.
and I said, okay. I said, well, what's the deal? They said, just imagine kind of a typical British rock and roll guy. He's tall, extremely thin. He's got like a kind of a black, slick down Beatle haircut, and he's very very pale complexion, and very British, and that's what they gave me to go on. And so I
So
drew a whole.
you drew something and it looked like a wanted poster at the post office,
Well,
going by description?
I drew basically a pencil version of this picture you're seeing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I drew that. Basically, the original is exactly the same as the pencil drawing. I faxed it to them, and Fred Woodward faxed me back, and he said, "This is fantastic. This is perfect. Go ahead and go to the finish on this and do it." And so I did that, and that started a nice relationship that I had with that magazine for, I'd say probably 5 years or so. I worked a
Where did
ton with.
where
Go
did
ahead.
this image land? Where did this image land in Rolling Stone? Where was
In
this?
the record review section,
Gotcha. Okay.
which was typically the illustrators
Mhm.
showcase. That's where they would showcase illustrators from week to week or month to month, whatever the. I think it might have been a bi-weekly when I was working with them, but I worked with them, and like I said, my agent would call up and she'd go, "Oh man, here we go again. Time Magazine, New York Times, Esquire, Playboy, blah, blah, blah." I just went on and on and on. That's Entertainment Weekly right there. Um, and I just really had a blast doing it. It was really fun doing that stuff, working with those people, and it was a great time. It was a great time, and financially great too. Um, and so but then things changed around 9/11. Everything started to go downhill after that with
Mhm.
that field.
Mhm. And this looks like a little bit later work for you, more
This
recent.
is okay. So here's the thing. I started that piece right there is a CJ Pyle piece. I need to explain this name thing because I get asked about it a lot, and a lot of people think I'm a pretentious jerk, for changing my name. But that's not really the case. What happened is I started to develop this kind of a personal style on my own in private. I developed it over the course of a few years. And when I felt comfortable, there was a person that I knew in Chicago that was a art publisher, and he published an art anthology called Blab. His name was Monty Beauchamp, and I really had a great relationship with Monty for a while. And I showed him some of this work, and he said, you got to come up here. We got to talk because I want to get you in the Carl Hammer Gallery, which was, in the art world, Carl Hammer was on the ground floor of basically discovering or bringing to the forefront self-taught and outsider artwork, which is a very kind of a niche sort of
Mhm.
a movement that's over the years has become much more popular. And Carl is one of the very first galleries to ever work with artists like that. And so it's very prestigious for me. And lo and behold, Monty did get the gallery interested in the artwork. And I started working with Carl. And but the thing about it is I had one show with Carl that was a very successful debut show in his gallery with this work.
Mm.
And he spoke to me and he goes, it's been kind of weird in here. He goes, these people are coming in here to look at your artwork and they're confused. And I said, well, what are they confused about? And he said, they think that they think they're going to be seeing work like they saw in Rolling Stone. They think that they're going to be seeing this work that you did when you were working commercially,
Mhm.
illustrating. And he goes, is there anything that we can do about that? Because it's causing a lot of confusion. He said, do you think that maybe we can alter your name a little bit? And so I said, yeah, we can do that. That makes sense. And my mother, one of my middle names is John. So my mother would always my mom would always call me CJ, hey, CJ, it's dinner time, that kind of stuff.
Mhm.
And so I just went, well, why don't instead of Chris Pyle, to avoid the confusion, just let's go under CJ Pyle, and that'll eliminate that problem, which it did. So that's the story behind that name. And, on Facebook and stuff, I think people are still confused. Like, isn't this just Chris Pyle? And it's like,
Mhm.
well, I use social media to promote my work. So,
Yeah, like Instagram and all the
right.
latest and greatest. Yeah.
Exactly. I use those formats or those platforms to promote my artwork more than to socialize. So that's where that confusion might be.
Well, we're gonna have to wrap up, CJ. We might as
Okay.
well wrap up like that now, but, if somebody wanted to come see you play the drums, how could they see you play the drums and where and with who?
I am with Gordon Bonham at the Slippery Noodle a lot. We play a lot down there, and we play other places too, but it's usually like either a concert setting or a place like that. But I'm with Gordon a lot. I've known Gordon since the Raging Texan days, and I've
Mhm.
always really admired him and liked him. And when we had the opportunity to start working together, I jumped on it. I like what he does a lot.
Yeah, it doesn't get much better than Gordon Bonham. I mean,
It
the guy
doesn't.
is just no.
It's he has a pure outlook on the music that he does, and that's what I really like about it. He does what he does, and it's he doesn't compromise, and I love that.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite guys in the world, and it's like so, when he said, I was like, "Oh, well, Chris Pyle's playing with me tonight." I go, "No." My head explosion, because the 2 worlds are colliding here together,
Right.
but, so yeah, Indianapolis fans, since that's kind of where we're aiming, and Indiana fans, it's a good idea to run into Chris at one of those Gordon Bonham Blues shows. And I just saw him a couple weeks ago at the Irvington Fest, playing with Gordon there. So it was a great, great show. And I'd like to wrap up tonight's show by saying thank you, Chris, for joining us. We had a great, great conversation. Thank you for putting up with me for all these years, stumbling up on stage. And I don't think I ever ruined one of your drums like maybe Kenny Aronoff might have, but that's a story for
I
another
lost you
time.
there.
But anyway, just wrapping up. Thanks, Chris. And we will see you all in the next episode of the Indiana
I,
Rock Machine. I'm Sly Rose, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.